High Speed 2,
HS2,
HS2,
Northern Powerhouse Rail,
Northern Powerhouse Rail between Leeds and Manchester. And I want to be the Prime Minister who does with Northern Powerhouse Rail what we did for Crossrail in London. We will also present an integrated plan for rail in the north.
The integrated rail plan.
Integrated Rail Plan,
The integrated rail plan.
integrated rail plan.
This is a betrayal of the North and of West Yorkshire. We were promised Northern Powerhouse Rail.
HS2 all the way to Leeds, a new line. That promise has been ripped up. He also promised the Northern Powerhouse Rail a new line from Manchester to Leeds, and that plan's been ripped up.
We are second-class citizens when it comes to transport.
So after months of delays, the Integrated Rail Plan has finally been published. Originally designed as a way to properly integrate plans for High Speed 2 and Northern Powerhouse Rail to best serve the North and the Midlands, the report is now a very long attempt to basically justify cancelling HS2's Eastern Leg and Northern Powerhouse Rail. Here's what's happening. The government is rowing back on its promises. That is a plain, objective fact. No matter how you try to twist or spin this IRP is a blatant betrayal of the North and the Midlands, pulling the rug from under our feet by cancelling major planned infrastructure investment, and trying to pass off microwave reheated porridge as a replacement. But you already knew that. I'm assuming you clicked this video to find out what this all actually means, so let's break it down. HS2's western leg will be built to Manchester as planned. A small section of HS2's eastern leg will be built between Birmingham and East Midlands Parkway as per recommendations from the National Infrastructure Commission last year. Two small sections of new high-speed rail will also be built in the north of England between Warrington and Manchester and Marsden on the border of Yorkshire. The Midland Main Line and TransPennine routes will be fully upgraded and electrified. Meanwhile, the rest of High Speed 2's eastern leg from the East Midlands to Leeds and York will be cancelled, as will most of Northern Powerhouse Rail, NPR, which was supposed to be a fully segregated new high-speed line from Liverpool through Manchester to Leeds. Before I go into more detail, let's just quickly break down a number that you've probably heard being bandied about by the government and some sympathetic press. £96 billion. £96 billion. Surely that's a lot of money, right? As Dan Hodges writes, that is a huge new investment into the North and Midlands, right? Except, not really. Well, £42 billion of that is the money that's already being spent on HS2 phases 1 and 2A from London to Birmingham and Crewe, which are already under construction, so that's definitely not new money. A further £17 billion is the money that's being spent to get HS2 phase 2B to Manchester. It's a relief to see that go ahead, but again, that was already promised, not a new announcement, so it's not new money. That leaves us with £37 billion of new rail announcements, not £96 billion. Except that's also including the small bit of HS2 East and Northern Powerhouse Rail that are being built, and also electrification of the Midland Main Line and TransPennine routes, which have already been promised. So actually almost none of that is new money. Another number you might have heard being mentioned is £185 billion. That's the amount of money the government claims building High Speed 2 and Northern Powerhouse Rail in full as per previous plans would have ended up costing. In other words, according to the government's own figures, they are slashing rail investment by half. That's just some useful context to bear in mind as we delve deeper into these plans. Oh, and two more things to note. One, consider this could be an updated version of the HS2 Explained video I made a year and a bit ago with the help of Gareth Dennis, as the IRP renders a lot of that video now outdated. Two, this is going to be a video about the plans contained within the IRP and their implications, not so much about the IRP text itself. If you want to see a proper page turn through the IRP, I would recommend going to watch Gareth Dennis's RailNatter on the subject, although a warning for your sanity, it is 1 hour and 43 minutes long, which is slightly shorter than the amount of time it will take to get from London to Leeds under the government's new plans, but I digress. HS2's eastern leg was supposed to branch off from Birmingham to serve East Midlands Hub, Leeds and York, with branches to the existing network to serve Chesterfield, Sheffield and stations north of York. East Midlands Hub would have served as a hub station for Nottingham, Derby and Leicester. The new plan will see just a short section of this high-speed line built between Birmingham and East Midlands Parkway, not East Midlands Hub, with trains running along the existing network to serve Derby, Nottingham and Sheffield. The Midland Main Line, which these new plans rely heavily on, will be fully upgraded and electrified. It's notable that electrification of the Midland Main Line was already promised about 10 years ago and was then cancelled in 2017 by Chris Grayling. The new Eastern Stub will deliver some of the planned improvements, mainly cutting journey times from London and Birmingham to the East Midlands and Sheffield, with the added benefit, as the report is extremely keen to point out, of serving Nottingham city centre directly. But it does little for capacity on the Midland Main Line north of East Midlands Parkway, and it does absolutely nothing for connectivity between the East Midlands and Sheffield and Leeds. The IRP also outlines a major improvement programme for the East Coast Main Line, which will now remain the primary route for trains between London and Leeds. These plans include the removal of key bottlenecks and the raising of line speeds on some sections to 140 miles per hour, going well beyond the currently ongoing improvements to the East Coast Main Line. So it can be said that this is one of the few genuinely new projects outlined in this plan. Birmingham to Leeds trains, meanwhile, will now be routed via Manchester and the TransPennine Route, which will deliver better journey times than at present, but with some pretty catastrophic capacity implications, which I will get to later. Prior to the plan's publication, there were some speculative reports in the media that the plan was going to include another small section of high-speed track between Leeds and Sheffield. The IRP contains no such plan, although there is reference to further consultation on what to do in regards to Sheffield to Leeds, which is left as a bit of a blank, basically kicking that can down the road, or rather down the track. Presently, journey times between the two cities are about 40 minutes. There are several railway lines linking the two, though none of them are electrified or particularly mainline standard. £100 million is also being committed to kick-starting a new mass transit system for Leeds, although it is notable that £100 million alone is not enough to build a new mass transit system. It's a start, but this is something that is long overdue. The IRP also outlines £100 million being spent on the aforementioned further consultation on what to do between Sheffield and Leeds. For some reason, these two £100 million figures are repeatedly conflated and combined. Don't really understand why. As far as I understand, these are two separate figures for two separate projects. So who's the winner out of all of this? Well, no one really. Nottingham will benefit from faster services to London and indeed direct services to London Euston. It is notable that Nottingham would have already gotten direct services to Birmingham Curzon Street under Midlands Rail Hub plans. But Nottingham is losing out from better connectivity to Leeds in the northeast, as is Sheffield. Leeds, which is missing out on better connectivity to the East Midlands, Sheffield and also Manchester and Liverpool, is undoubtedly one of the biggest losers of all. For the East Coast Main Line, these new improvements sound good, but become more and more problematic the deeper you dig beneath the surface. These new plans will deliver better journey times to London for stations like Leeds, York, Darlington, Durham and Newcastle, though not as significant improvements as would have been achieved by HS2. It also means the route south of York will continue to serve primarily as an intercity route, instead of becoming more of a commuter-oriented route for intermediate stations between London and York. And it also means a huge amount of disruption potentially on the horizon as the existing route is rebuilt, probably similar to what was experienced on the West Coast Main Line during the early 2000s. And with the Midland Main Line also being heavily rebuilt at the same time, there's little opportunity for any major Project Rio-style diversions, meaning a lot of rail replacement buses on the horizon. And after all that is finished, if you say want to travel from Newcastle to Nottingham, it's still going to be a pain in the arse.
And I want to be the Prime Minister who does with Northern Powerhouse Rail what we did for Crossrail in London. And today I am going to deliver on my commitment to that vision with a pledge to fund the Leeds to Manchester route.
In one of his first major speeches as Prime Minister back in July 2019, Boris Johnson stood in front of Rocket at the Museum of Science and Industry in Manchester and promised to build Northern Powerhouse Rail from Manchester to Leeds. Well, we're not getting that. Instead, we're getting a Staley Bridge bypass, which will start at Manchester Piccadilly and finish just east of the Sandedge tunnels on the border of Yorkshire, with trains running along the existing TransPennine route through Huddersfield and Dewsbury to Leeds, which will be heavily upgraded. The whole TransPennine route will be fully electrified, and this is actually due to finish before the Staley Bridge bypass bit is built. TransPennine electrification, it is notable, has been promised and cancelled at least, multiple times since the 1990s. I think it's been re-promised and re-announced at least 15 times in the last 3 years. The government bitterly complains that under previous plans they'd have spent billions of pounds electrifying the TransPennine line and then immediately building a whole new route across the Pennines for intercity trains, but this completely overlooks the fact that an electrified TransPennine route would still have been very useful for those towns and villages along the route which the line serves, not to mention freight. It's unclear to me how an increase of long-distance capacity and short-distance capacity, both trying to use the same existing route, is in any way achievable, or indeed the promised 33-minute journey time, somehow only 4 minutes longer than what would have been achieved via an entirely new segregated line. Not to mention the addition of trainloads of passengers trying to get between Leeds and Birmingham. The IRP suggests that 8 fast trains an hour could be run along the route, up from the present 5. How on earth is that going to be achieved without decimating local services for stations along the route, like Marsden, Slough or Batley? Might we even see those stations end up closing? With the cancel of NPR all the way through to Leeds, Bradford won't be getting the through station it's long since argued for. The IRP tries to compensate for this by promising to upgrade and electrify the existing route between Bradford Interchange and Leeds through New Pudsey, with a promised journey time of 12 minutes. Which is good news if you're trying to get from Bradford to Leeds, but not much use if you're trying to get from Bradford to Manchester or Liverpool. Heading west, there's been a long-running argument over whether the NPR station in Manchester should be above or below ground. The option the government have selected is obviously the cheapest one, which is a combined enlarged surface station with 6 platforms for both HS2 and NPR trains, meaning NPR trains from Liverpool to Leeds will have to reverse in Manchester Piccadilly. This brings me to my absolute favourite paragraph in this entire 162-page text, in which the government attempt to justify building this turnback station for high-speed trains in Manchester by saying, well, many major stations on European high-speed networks use this principle and it works just fine, like Rome, Milan, Zurich, Frankfurt and Stuttgart. As in Stuttgart 21, Stuttgart Hauptbahnhof, the station that is being slowly and painfully rebuilt from a terminus station to a through station, exactly because the Germans have long since realised that turnback stations for high-speed trains are less than ideal. The project is massively overrun, is costing over €8 billion and is steeped in so much controversy that it's absolutely mind-boggling to me that the person who wrote this paragraph and the presumably multiple people who read it had never heard of it. All over Europe there have been many projects to turn inconvenient turnback stations into through stations in recent decades, including in Berlin and Vienna. There are similar plans in Frankfurt am Main Hauptbahnhof, one of Europe's biggest and busiest stations, as well as Budapest Nyugati. In France, meanwhile, there was an entire high-speed line built, the LGV Interconnexion Est, entirely for the purpose of bypassing Paris in order to avoid having to reverse TGV trains in the major Paris termini. It just beautifully encapsulates and epitomises for me just how ignorant and wrong-headed the government's approach to all of this is, that whilst Europe is spending all this time and money turning inconvenient turnback stations into through stations, our plan for the next 20 years is to build a new turnback station in Manchester Piccadilly. Although Boris Johnson's government has never explicitly committed to it, extending NPR west to Liverpool with a new purpose-built line has been another long-standing ambition for the North, which would also double up as an extension of HS2 into Liverpool. Where that line would terminate at an expanded Liverpool Lime Street or at a new station or underground has always been left as a bit of an open question. Well, as expected, the IRP answers this question by doing the barest minimum possible, which is building a new high-speed stub off the western leg to Warrington Bank Quay, where the low-level platforms will be reinstated. West of Warrington Bank Quay, the trains will run along the currently freight-only Fiddler's Ferry line, which will obviously be upgraded and electrified as far as Ditton, and then along the existing electrified route from Crewe through South Parkway into Lime Street Station, which would presumably have to be expanded in some way, although again, it's not clear how this is going to be achieved and how any of this is going to be achieved without having some impact on local services to local stations. According to the IRP, the spur off the western leg of HS2 onto the West Coast Main Line, known as the Golden Spur, will be reviewed as part of the Union Connectivity Review. Well, the UCR was released just a few days later, and it did not substantially answer the question of what to do with the Golden Spur, but it did say that it may later be open to redesigning to better improve journey times from London to Scotland, which would presumably be achieved by extending High Speed 2 further north, possibly as far as Preston. Again, this is a can that's been kicked down the track, although in this one specific case it might end up with something above and beyond what was originally promised being done, which is overall good news, although the uncertainty around it is probably not great for Wigan, which has been basing its transport planning around the assumption that it will be the northern end of HS2's western leg. The plan also contains the green light for the Crewe North Link, which will allow trains to Manchester and Scotland to stop at Crewe and then immediately rejoin the main line, which is good news for Crewe. The text of the IRP does also acknowledge a few other areas where improvements are needed, but doesn't make any particular announcements or commitments regarding them. The Castlefield Corridor, where the Manchester Recovery Task Force is currently undergoing the process of redesigning the timetable to make it work using the existing infrastructure, obviously because the necessary planned infrastructure, platforms 15 and 16 at Manchester Piccadilly, were never built. Connectivity between Manchester and Sheffield is mentioned. This is something that both the original plans for HS2 and NPR have massively overlooked. There are currently ongoing improvements to capacity on the Hope Valley line, easing a few bottlenecks such as the curve at Dore and Totley. The end of this will hopefully be the creation of a third path for long-distance trains along the Hope Valley line from Manchester to Sheffield. A passing remark is made dismissing the possibility of building a new purpose-built line between Manchester and Sheffield. Personally, I think that's what's going to be needed eventually, but there's little chance of that happening anytime soon. There's also a hint, but not a commitment, that the Hope Valley line may one day be electrified. Upgrades and electrification between Leeds and Hull are mentioned, hinted at, but again not promised. And upgrades to the East Coast Main Line north of York are also discussed, with the eventual aim of getting up to 8 trains an hour, up from the present 6. This is something I will return to and discuss in a future video. In my view, all of this paints a rather bleak picture for the future of rail in the UK. Rather than building new, purpose-built, high-speed infrastructure fit for the 21st century, we continue with our long-standing habit of over-relying on upgraded Victorian infrastructure. Journey times will improve on most, but not all, of the stations that were due to benefit from HS2 and NPR, but the main problem here is capacity. By forcing more frequent and faster long-distance trains to share tracks with local and regional services, it's difficult to see how local services aren't going to suffer. Say, for instance, between East Midlands Parkway and Sheffield, and between Standedge Tunnel and Leeds. And even then, many in the rail industry are very sceptical about the particular promises that are made in terms of journey time improvements and capacity improvements. Are they even achievable at all? In justifying these watered-down plans, the government is absolutely desperate to point out all of the flaws with the previous plans for HS2 and NPR, about how they won't achieve this and they won't achieve that. But these weren't really problems with the plans for HS2 and NPR. These were the problems with a lack of a wider government strategy. We did not have to cancel HS2 East or Northern Powerhouse Rail to achieve electrification of the Midland Main Line or the TransPennine Route. Those are blatant false dichotomies. And all of these local stations, all of them would have seen their services improved, not worsened, if we'd had a proper plan in place to make use of released capacity. That is purely a question of government policy. So there you go, that's my breakdown of the integrated rail plan. I'm going to stop talking now before I have a breakdown myself. Fighting for rail improvements is going to continue being an uphill battle for the foreseeable future, but all hope is not lost. The original path for the eastern leg of HS2 is still safeguarded, and we've now seen the Labour Party come out explicitly in favour of delivering High Speed 2 East and Northern Powerhouse Rail in full. So, with the next election, a change of government could potentially see this question revisited. All I can say now is watch this space. I've been David Frankel, thank you for watching, and please subscribe.
But we cannot make these improvements in isolation from one another, because we'll only be doing half the job. We will not fix the great musculoskeletal problem of UK transport. Yes, we must fix the joint between the knee bone and the thigh bone and the shin bone and the ankle bone. And yes, we must fix the arthritis in the fingers and the toes. But we also have to fix the spine, Mr. Speaker. And our generation faces a historic choice. We can try to get by We can try to get by with the existing routes from north to south. We can consign the next generation to overcrowding, standing up in the carriageways, or we can have the guts to take a decision. No matter how difficult, unlike the party opposite, by the way, Mr. Speaker, no matter how difficult and how controversial, that will deliver prosperity to every part of the country.